I'm Tina Olson. I'm the director here at the Williams College Museum of Art. It's such a great pleasure to see all of you here on the first day of our long-awaited Warhol by the Book exhibition. This is an exhibition that has been in the works for a long, long time. So it is really, really thrilling to see all this work, Warhol's work, but also all of our work finally up and available for everybody to see. So brava to a great number of people here in the room. Matt Wrbican and Kathryn Price. Matt is the chief archivist at the Warhol Museum. Katie is curator of collections. I'm going to introduce them both briefly, and then we'll have a reception in the rotunda just around the corner. The galleries will be open for your perusal, and we'll have some more remarks a little bit later. So, Matt Wrbican has been at the Warhol Museum a number of years. His primary responsibility has been for the archives, and he has curated and co-curated dozens of exhibitions, including the upcoming Andy Warhol and the Silver Screen, Twisted Pair, Marcel Duchamp and Andy Warhol, which was in 2010, and Warhol Live, Music and Dance and Warhol's Work in 2008. That's a random sampling from a very, very long list. He also oversaw and cataloged Warhol's time capsules for many, many years. He has published and lectured around the world about Warhol. He has 2 MFA degrees from Carnegie Mellon's University in Intermedia Electronic Art and in Sculpture from Hunter College in New York. Kathryn Price is Curator of Collections here at the Williams College Museum of Art. She holds a master's degree from the Williams College Graduate Program in the History of Art, and her areas of interest are 19th century European and American art and modern and contemporary art. Katie has curated exhibitions, a great number of exhibitions here. Here again, it's just a sampling. Alex Soth, Niagara, William Morris Hunt, A Strong Impression, and 72 Degrees, LA Art from the collection. I'm going to now pass the mic to Katie for a few more remarks, but you have a mic, do you know?
I do. Yes. I hope it's on and it's working. Good, great. Well, I want to echo Tina's thanks for everyone coming out on yet another cold and snowy evening here in the Berkshires. I am just thrilled to be opening this exhibition tonight and to have Matt here. Matt has been here now for 2 weeks installing this show, and I checked with our registrar this evening, I think this may be the largest show we've ever done here at the Williams College Museum. In terms of number of objects, I think we're well over 500, and we are taking up most of the exhibition galleries on this floor. So I want to thank Matt for his generosity in bringing this exhibition here. And
Thanks
really,
for lunch every day.
Well, I've been showing him Spring Street, our choices there, and he loves our culinary choices. And I also want to just say thank you to everyone at the Warhol Museum. This has been a big show to organize. I know Jesse Kowalski is here tonight from the Warhol Museum, formerly of the Warhol Museum, and there are some other special people in the audience as well. So thank you all for coming out, and I really want to say thank you for all the support our staff has given this project. They've been really supportive from the beginning, about 4 years ago when I started thinking of this material. And our prep staff, our registrars, our curatorial team, and our PR and events people, we'll be thanking them in more length later. One person who isn't here tonight, who I just want to acknowledge, is our former colleague, Vivian Patterson, long-time Curator of Collections here at WCMA. She passed away last year, but was really responsible for bringing this material, the Richard Holmes collection, to WCMA. She did the 2 previous shows here on that material. She was a dear friend, and I think she really would have loved this show. So Viv, wherever you are, I know you're watching. Just a little bit of housekeeping. Please pick up our exhibition and program brochure. You can sort of take home your own Warhol, as it were. This is the first of a series of programs called Warhol and deep dives into one aspect of Warhol's career. The second program will be on Tuesday, April 2nd at 6 p.m. On Warhol and cookbooks. Our own Dara Goldstein, professor of Russian here at Williams and founder of Gastronomica, will be in conversation with Susan Rossi Wilcox, who has done a lot of really wonderful original research on Warhol's cookbook that he collaborated with Susie Frankfurt on. So that's Tuesday, April 7th. And then Warhol and Infiltrated Publishing on Tuesday, April 28th at 6 p.m. will feature Lucy Mulroney, who is now at Syracuse Libraries. She is probably the foremost expert, I would say, other than Matt, on this material. She's doing her PhD at Rochester and really is the one who got me interested in this work. She'll be conversing with Chris Cerf. Chris is the son of Bennett Cerf, who founded Random House. Chris was a collaborator with Warhol on the index book, the sort of wonderful cabinet you'll see here behind you, the book they produced in 1967. So again, that's Tuesday, April 28th. Tomorrow, if some of you are in town, we have a tour with one of our great student tour guides at noon. So please do stop by. I do also want to mention that the show will be going to the Warhol Museum next. It will open there in October and be on view there through January. And then it will travel to the Morgan Library in New York, probably for the spring of 2016. Our colleague Sheila Bevan is here tonight, and probably some other venues. So we're excited about that. And really excited to talk with Matt tonight.
Sure.
Matt has been at the Warhol for 23 years and is just a font of knowledge. And we've been sharing, Matt has been sharing anecdotes as we've been installing the show. And I know you want to hear from him. So what we're going to do is talk for a while. And we have some different sort of things that have come up in the course of the installation that we
made some great discoveries.
Made some great discoveries sort of before and during this installation. And then I'll turn it over to all of you so you can ask your own questions for 10 or 15 minutes at the end. And then we'll drink.
Yeah.
Great. So, Matt, the sort of history for this exhibition, I'd love to talk a little bit about the backstory, how you started thinking about Warhol in this context. I think, for most of us here, we know maybe one or two aspects of Warhol's work, maybe the Marilyns or Liz or Elvis. But I think this exhibition will come as a surprise to most people, particularly the early gallery, where you see this work that doesn't really look like Warhol or the Warhol we're sort of used to knowing. So I'm just, give us a little bit of context. Why has this aspect of his career been overlooked in the
I think
past?
because it's too easy to overlook, in a way. I mean, if you're about my age or so, in mid-50s or a little older, you probably remember going into bookshops and seeing an Andy Warhol hardcover or paperback that was usually marked down because they weren't selling. And you would think, not too much of it, perhaps. And that would be like the mass market books, but as you said, his work in books goes all the way back, not just to the 50s, but even to his days in college. And we have that pretty well represented in the exhibition as well, with illustrations that he did as class assignments, to illustrate a novel, All the King's Men, and also Old Mortality by Kathryn Ann Porter. And then there's also an original story that he worked on with Philip Pearlstein, who was his classmate who's also represented in the Wrbican collection. Nice painting. And Philip's still going strong at age 90. That's our next exhibition at the Warhol. That's another thing I'm co-curating, the work of Andy and Philip in their early days, which is a really exciting exhibition to do. But so they collaborate on this story about Leroy the Mexican jumping bean, and there are 3 illustrations that survive from that project, and they're all here in the show. I think Warhol, in a way, he was open to every possibility. You look around at this show and, just the work that he produced, it's so diverse. Mm-hmm. It's all over the place in terms of technique, the things that he was interested in. The fact that this amazing print portfolio about the assassination of JFK you would think, well, it's just an edition of prints, but it's a book. And it was conceived as a book. Our copy is not bound as a book, but there are copies that were. And this is the cover all the way over there. And everything just slipped right in there. And it's this amazing visual record of the Kennedy assassination with text. But he worked his films into his books. He worked every aspect of his creativity into his books. And the index book that you mentioned before, in a way, is kind of a documentary film, perhaps, of Warhol's involvement with the Velvet Underground, but it's in book form with a little bit of audio included, which we'll have when we all clear out of here. We'll turn the audio back on and everybody can hear the 4-minute recording that's in there. Yeah.
So nearly everyone in this room hasn't had the opportunity yet to see the show. We will do that soon. But I'm wondering, walk us through the exhibition. Maybe just sort of talk about your approach to what people will be seeing. I mean, as you note, Warhol worked in pretty much every media possible, and I think we have nearly everything represented. Perhaps not sculpture or
The index book is pretty sculptural.
Sculptural. Well, that's true. So talk us through what people will see as they start through the show.
Well, you start at the beginning, and the show is laid out almost strictly chronologically. There's a couple of little bumps that you'll see where things kind of circle back around or they jump ahead a couple of decades, but it's always for a very good reason, I think. You start with the college work and then all the commercial book jackets that Warhol did from about 1951 to 63. There's 19 that we've identified. There might be more that are out there, and really, anybody who loves to go to the thrift shops and used bookshops, I mean, you can find these things. You can still find them, but you better hurry up because the prices are going to go up really, really fast, just like they did with all the LPs. But I mean, you can find these things sometimes for $1 or $2. So we have 19 of those, but we also have alternate versions of them. We have framed drawings that are other ideas that Warhol had for those jackets. And then the exhibition goes into 3 writers who were really important to Warhol in the 1950s, starting with Truman Capote, and also Ralph Ward, better known as Corky, who collaborated with Warhol on probably more book projects than any other of his friends. And there's a lot of original drawings for those pieces. We have actually a kind of an Allée de Corky out there of drawings, which is really fun. And then also Ralph Pomeroy, who was a poet who worked with Warhol on his Proust spoof called À la recherche du chou perdu. So, and then it gets into commercial projects that Warhol did and just the diversity of those things. He did a coloring book for a leather company. He did A lot of children's stories. He illustrated a lot of children's stories, 6 of them. And we have all 6 of them in the show. Multiple copies. In fact, there's a couple where you can see the entire story. You can read the whole thing. And then I should say also we have a lot of this stuff on iPads. So if the digital world is more your thing, then you'll be more at home that way. But you can also turn the pages of these things, which is really, really helpful since we can't turn the pages of the books in the display. What else is there? There's a little booklet for Gunther Jekyll. There's a lingerie catalog he did the cover for. There's a shoe branding campaign that he put together. And all of these things are in book form. I mean, and there's others that I can't think of right now. So it's extremely diverse group of things. A cookbook, an etiquette book, a language book, like learning Spanish, which has lots of great illustrations. And then there's also a lot of works for books that never really happened. They never quite got off the ground, and there's about 20 of those represented in the show, either in exclusively as drawings or little mock-ups, or just manuscripts that really suggest that this was an idea for a book that Warhol would illustrate. And in some cases we have the drawings and the manuscript, but they were never put together as books. So that's just over there.
It's a very densely packed
It is
gallery.
really dense over there. And there's a really great little video that my colleagues in our education department in Pittsburgh put together on how Warhol made his blotted line drawings. So if you are interested in his technique at that time in the 50s, you can watch the video.
Right.
And then we come in here, it's the 1960s. We have Marilyn over there. And in that long silver thing that looks like a horse's trough, there's actually a unique book that Warhol made right around the same time as he did the Marilyn prints. And that's a pretty amazing object. You'll have to take a look at that. The index book and other 60s books. And also, this is maybe it's one of the little hiccups in the chronology. In the 1960s, Warhol began to be really well known. He really started to achieve real fame, which is what he wanted. And as part of that fame, he was sought out to endorse books, and and just his basic appearance on the cover of a book was thought to help sell copies of the book. So we have all of those collected over there too. And then the blue movie print. So in 1968, Warhol made a film of his friends Louis Walden and Viva, enjoying a sunny afternoon of conversation and sex. And he took one frame from the film and screen printed it onto silver mylar, which is gorgeous. And 2 years later, it was published in book form, and you'll see that over in that gallery, along with portraits of Truman Capote, paintings, a painting, a drawing, and a photograph that use one of Warhol's books as subject matter, and then you see the book as well, etc. It's like, it is an exhausting exhibition.
And then we have another gallery yet of the 80s works.
Yeah.
So maybe we can backtrack a little bit and go back to the 50s and talk about Warhol. He grows up in Pittsburgh. He moves to New York in, what was it, 1949. He becomes this the most, I guess, awarded or highly regarded commercial artist working in New York at that time. And if we could talk a little bit about the notion of this sort of making books for a public, for marketing, for his clients, his customers, versus the sort of private nature of books and the sort of the different kind of thinking going on there. With Warhol, did bookmaking start out being a private notion for him? Was that
actually making, I think, the whole book in a sense, rather than just doing a jacket or illustrations in a book? I think it probably was a private thing, but I think also, Andy was looking for ways to be a success, which in the early 1950s, and really for him throughout his whole life, meant financial success and fame and fortune. So, he was looking for subjects and friends to collaborate with on books that had subjects that would be really popular, that would be amusing, they would be humorous, fun, that would somehow also would connect in some way to something in popular culture. And actually, the other night, I think I mentioned this to you, I was in my hotel room watching Turner Classic Movies, and what the hell was that movie that was on?
something with Charleston Heston, I think you said.
Yeah. Anyway, it was some really amazing costume drama from 1953. And, and I was looking on the IMDb, and there's like all these great costume dramas that were coming out at around that time. And what book does Warhol do? He does Love is a Pink Cake, which is essentially a costume drama. But it's all these sad, romances from history or from literature, from Shakespeare, etc. And they're all in these amazing costumes. Everybody. I mean, it's like, I think, Warhol was so much a part of popular culture. I mean, he fed on it, and I think that comes through in so much of his work. And that was just, I don't know, maybe that's kind of shallow, but it just was kind of a kind of a eureka little moment for me, which was pretty great to experience. The other books that he did at around that time, they're of a totally different nature. Like the one that you have the drawings for, Snow on the Street and Rain in the Sky. It's just a much more kind of a ephemeral in the sense of like the content of it. It's very hazy. The storyline is sort of hazy. The drawings in it they're very faint and delicate and really beautiful. Whereas Love is a Pink Cake, they're kind of cartoony and crude. But I don't know. Am I answering your question? Am I losing it?
I think there are similarities between the sort of promotional books he's doing versus the sort of
it's like the artist books things that he's doing like In the Bottom of My Garden and that sort of thing versus the commercial things. There's a huge difference. Yeah. And a lot of those sort of what I think of as artist books and what other people have thought of as promotional books, it's the same thing because he's always promoting his own work. And those sorts of books he would give away to art directors, to his friends in the business, in the magazine business, in the publishing world. And he would also exhibit them in a gallery, and they would be for sale. He would give them away to friends. They would have coloring parties with all of his friends at the Serendipity Cafe. And his friends, I guess they would just, have frozen hot chocolate all night and go crazy with Dr. Martin's dyes.
Well, that's a good point. So that these coloring parties really were, he was collaborating
It was a social event,
with friends, with neighbors, with neighborhood kids, And I think so much of his practice sort of started in his commercial world in
Yeah.
the 50s. I mean, he's
Yeah.
collaborating. This is sort of his early factory, as it were,
Right.
these coloring
Right.
parties at Serendipity. You know, you could also think with the ink blot technique that he
Yes.
really is using so much of, that could be seen as an early sort of precursor to his silk screening process.
Yeah. Warhol was always looking to make his work easier. He loved instant gratification.
Don't we all?
It's like he was Polaroid's best friend.
You'll also see Warhol is using a lot of the source imagery that he becomes sort of known for in the pop era. He starts this very early on
In the 50s. Yeah, right.
There are some great examples of 25 Cats Named Sam
Right.
and One Blue Pussy.
Right.
He's using books from the 30s, 40s, and 50s, these books of photographs of cats, literally pulling these as his sources for these ink blot drawings.
Making new books out of old ones.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think one of the takeaways for me with this project has been that he's later into the 50s. He's working on in this very sort of primitive manner almost, with these rubber stamps and with this, sort of collaborative coloring parties. But he's simultaneously working on, he does The Adventures of Maud Noakes, this really wonderful dust jacket cover with stamps of heads the year before he starts his Marilyn.
Right.
So it's really a simultaneous, he's doing this sort of almost more primitive look, and then he jumps to this. So talk a little bit about what that meant for him, that push, that switch.
Well, I've felt that when Warhol took his trip around the world in 1956, he realized, as you do when you take a trip around the world, you start to realize how big the world is and what you want from it. And Warhol wanted to be not known as a commercial artist, he wanted to be known as a fine artist. And around that time, when he came back to New York, he started to paint because he wanted to be exhibited in real, quote unquote, real art galleries, not the Bodley Gallery and Serendipity and places like that where he had been showing his work up to that point. He tried to get into the Tanager Gallery, which is an artist co-op gallery downtown. And actually had a number of his college classmates who were in that gallery, as it was a co-op. And the story goes that his paintings were rejected because they were too gay, basically. They were images of men kissing, and it was very not cool in 1956. To portray that. Being gay was against the law. And, all the other artists were showing abstract expressionism. So he was rejected from that. And just like he had been rejected also by a number of the men that he had been having relationships with. They always ended badly. Like we were talking about the other day, there's that great interview that Warhol gave to Gene Swenson where he says, "I want to be a machine because machines have no feelings." That's 1963. And I think if you put his biography together with that statement, you really start to understand what he was getting at. He was tired of being rejected. And so he wanted to be a machine so that his work would be easier, and that's when he started tracing images of soup cans that were as banal as they could possibly be, that had nothing to do with abstract expressionism, but also nothing to do with sexuality, per se. Although there's, I should say that when I was in graduate school, I had a professor who was part of the New York scene in the 50s. And he said that the abstract expressionists always talked about their paintings as soup, and that you were trying to like move your paint around to get the soup right. And I thought, like, there it is. Like that's like Warhol was a great punster, and that has got to be one of the best puns ever. Absolutely. It's like the abstract expressionists didn't even know it, but he was giving them the finger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and we may not have Warhol's sort of iconic soup, Campbell's soup paintings or prints.
We have his mother's.
But we have Julia Warhol's wonderful drawing in the next gallery of Campbell's soup with cats,
yes.
of all things.
Soup very good.
Soup very good. So tell us a little bit about the relationship between Warhol and Julia and what that was like. She literally showed up on his doorstep one day in New York, and she never left,
right.
pretty much.
Andy was the baby. He was the youngest of 3 kids, and his 2 older brothers, they had married and they started families, and Julia felt like there was nothing for her to do in Pittsburgh, and she knew that Andy was not much for housekeeping and cooking and cleaning and all of those basic things, and she wanted to take care of him. So she did for the next 20 years. She moved to New York in about 1952 and stayed with him until around 71 when she went back to Pittsburgh, and she had a stroke there and passed away in 72.
But their collaboration in terms of...
Yeah, the collaboration. Julia had this amazing handwriting that I think was actually what everybody in her part of the world learned, because we have letters from her family, and they all have this amazing handwriting. It's beautiful. It's so quirky and folky and just completely unique. And Warhol loved it, and so did every art director in New York. And you'll see in a lot of his work over there from the 1950s, it's Julia's handwriting that is the text. And there's Jamie. Hey, Jamie. Speaking of the Warhol family, there's Andy Warhol's nephew. Julia also was an artist in her own right, and she actually won 2 awards from New York Graphic Arts. What were they? The Art Directors Club and the American Institute for Graphic Arts. In 1960, Warhol had this kind of long parade of these artist books that he produced in the 50s, as we were talking about. And the very last one of them is actually a book by his mother called Holy Cats, by Andy Warhol's mother. She was always credited as Andy Warhol's mother, and even the awards that she won are made out to Andy Warhol's mother.
Well, she was her personality comes through, I think, in that, their collaborations. And was she suggesting topics? Was she suggesting, breeding their cats, and then that this would spawn these subsequent book projects? And
that's anyone's guess at this point, I think. Maybe Jamie knows. He left.
One of the other sort of main points, that I want to bring out here is how much there is still to learn about Warhol. He is a bit of the ubiquitous artist these days, and in good part to you and your traveling exhibitions and your publications. But I think one of the things I've learned from working on this material is particularly the work in the 1950s. Mm-hmm. There's a real gap in what we know, what we can say for sure. the sort of collaborations that Warhol had with these authors. We're not quite sure who approached,
Right,
whom.
right.
So I think that there's a lot of scattered information, and it's difficult to discuss that era really with full authority.
Yeah, I think that what's missing at this point are probably things like correspondence that would really, really help. Like we have some correspondence in this show. There's 2 really amazing postcards that Warhol's friend Dudley Huppler, who was an artist, he worked in this pointillist style of drawing. He was at Yaddo, the artist colony, and he talks about, in these postcards, about Ralph Pomeroy, this beautiful young new poet who's shown up at Yaddo, and Andy, you have to do his portrait. I'll introduce you to him, and then you can do it. And we have the postcards in the show, and we have the portrait that Andy drew of Ralph that's in your collection, also in the exhibition. So we need more things like that kind of tissue that connects everything together. There's a lot of manuscripts in our collection that seem like they would have to be for publications of one sort or another. We don't know how Warhol got them. We don't know why exactly in many cases, but there are some that seem like they're alternate texts for the Holy Cats book. One of them is written by Dick Hurd, I'm pretty sure, who was also wrote a hit song for Elvis Presley around 1970. And there's another manuscript by him as well called Mother Was a Goose, Rhymes I Never Told My Mother, or something like that. I can't remember. It's like some crazy thing.
Well, and you've made discoveries in the course of putting the show together. I mean,
just finding all those manuscripts. Yeah, like it's. I mean, our collection is like 500,000 objects. Most of it isn't cataloged yet. So I mean, you can kind of like pull a box off a shelf and find things that nobody knew about. So we have a long way to go with our collection. So I'm sure a lot more discoveries are going to be made, and maybe somebody will look back on this show and just say, this is a terrible show. Like, didn't they know about all this other stuff? It's like, well, we didn't. I'm sorry.
And some things, are new discoveries that are on view here for the first time.
Well, things in your collection. Just last week, we found out that the balloon in your index book is not fused together to the pages, so you can actually see the balloons. I have never seen a copy of Warhol's index book where you can see the balloon.
Yes, we had to quickly change the label text. So in this cabinet here, in the back of the gallery, features the index book, which is one of Warhol's really iconic works in this media. And Matt had said, well, the balloon may have had the index printed on it. We don't know. It's often fused together. Your copy, one of your copies, has a sort of aluminum foil balloon
wrapped around the balloon. It's really strange.
And it ends up, we opened our index book, and there's the balloon with a purple printed index. So how apropos for
yeah, really, yeah.
Other exciting discoveries you made along the way. I remember you calling me several times to say, what you had discovered.
What did I say?
I know. Well, the Warhol Foundation has been very generous to many, many museums, including WCMA.
Yes.
And we received another gift last year of a handful of Warhol prints. We received 5 prints, and you all received, what was it, a truckload of
We
new
received
material?
a 53-foot-long truck. Yeah. Not an empty one. It was full. Stacked to the gills.
Some of which that material is featured for the first time.
Thank you for the prompt.
Yeah.
Now I know what you're talking about. Yeah. So some of the things that were in there, and we only have a few of these on display because they're so big. You could actually you could fill this gallery with these things, and it is the galleys for Warhol's books Exposures, which is from 1979, and also for America, which is from 1986. And these are, for those of you who only know how to make a book using a computer, these are the paste-ups where you would actually take a photograph and put glue on the back of it and glue it down to a big sheet of paper, you know, and then the people would actually write notes right on the photograph.
Measure things out, and, right. You could play around with it in sort of physical, real time.
Yes, it was very, very physical. And actually, one of the layouts that is completely fantastic is for Exposures. And the reason I say that is, you know, there was a story, and I can't remember where it's recounted. It's probably in Bob Colacello's book, though, his biography of Warhol called Holy Terror, where he says that Andy wanted to call the book Social Disease, which the publisher was not very happy about that. As they were wondering, you know, like, how can we sell this book? And so they've made him change it to Exposures, and instead the introduction is titled Social Disease. But we found the original title page for the book, and it says Social Disease, so it's like, it's true.
You know, also, you know, along the line of new discoveries and things, I mean, other things you've known about in your collection, but are sort of here for the first time. The drawings, the original drawings for 25 Cats Named Sam, with the bright, the vibrant Dr. Martin's dyes.
Yeah. Well, those we found those in one of the time capsules just about 2 years ago,
right.
And the thing that's really amazing about those, there's 6 of them in the exhibition here, and the color is like, if you look at other Warhol hand-colored drawings from the 1950s, they've usually been exposed to light quite a lot. And I've seen some where they're, like, the color is like the color of this wood frame, not that, that's what they're supposed to be like. But these are aniline dyes, and they're really fugitive. They fade very, very quickly in light. And so we have 6 of these cat drawings that this is the very first time that they've ever been shown anywhere. So you'll see, like, what this color is really supposed to look like. This is really what it looked like 60 years ago. And hopefully we'll be able to make it last maybe another 60 years, I hope.
Let's maybe shift a little bit our focus to some of the personalities in this exhibition.
Yeah.
Some of the people Warhol knew, and maybe Truman Capote would be a good place to start.
Yeah, Truman is kind of all over this exhibition. Sometimes it's very subtle, and sometimes it's very blatant. But he turns up in the very first gallery. You know, Warhol was really infatuated with Truman Capote, probably when he was still in college, probably around his senior year. He, you know, Capote's book, Other Voices, Other Rooms, came out. It was a bestseller, and there was this very, very sensual photograph of Capote on the back cover, and, you know, Warhol's friends say Warhol became obsessed with that photograph. And when he moved to New York, he started stalking Warhol, basically. Like we were talking about, like the analogy of Ron Galella. Like, you know, Warhol said Ron Galella was his favorite photographer, and I think it was probably because he really identified with him, like the way that he would, Galella stalk Jackie Onassis in the 70s, jumping out of bushes, and I think Warhol was probably doing something similar with Capote. He was writing him postcards to him, he was calling him up. We have a postcard in the exhibition that is a very, 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 very sweet, cute postcard that was not sent for some reason. Maybe there was a typo in it or something, I'm not sure. But it's addressed to Capote, and it is signed "From Me and My Cat." And it's an image of Greta Garbo and the actor, her leading man, John something, whose name I can't remember now. And it's a postcard still from MoMA's collection, and Warhol's added word balloons to it where Garbo is saying Merry Christmas and her leading man is saying meow.
So Truman, at one point, he sort of said, cease and desist.
Well, yeah, there's a letter from Capote's agent in the exhibition that was sent to Warhol. Warhol got Capote's address just by contacting his agent, and she was more than happy to comply until I think she realized her mistake. And this card says, Truman's very upset right now, but I think it's actually was because he was in his play. No, I can't remember that. What was the name of the play? House of.
Can't remember myself.
House of Leaves, something like that. I can't remember. Anyway, but he was producing that play, and it was very stressful for him, and so he was upset. And I think also he was that Warhol was kind of harassing him, basically. And Warhol did go to. He attended the opening run of that play. We have his playbill from it in the exhibition. We have Warhol's copy of another Capote paperback, A Tree of Night and Other Stories. But also, just a few months after Capote's play opened, Warhol had his very first solo exhibition in New York. And the title of the exhibition was 15 Drawings Based on the Work of Truman Capote. So kind of like that 1 year, he kind of squeezed everything he possibly could into it regarding Capote.
And their relationship, it eventually evolved.
It evolved.
Capote got past this stalking.
Yeah. And I think it was once Capote saw that that Warhol was achieving what he was achieving as a pop artist by 1966. When Capote had his black and white ball at the Plaza Hotel to celebrate the publication of his novel In Cold Blood. Warhol was one of the 400 people who got invited to that party, which is the party of the decade or the party of the century, depending on who you believe. And we have Warhol's invitation to the party in the exhibition as well, which is really, really pretty cool. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
I think maybe just one last note. I want to make sure everyone goes into the sort of last gallery right off the rotunda. We have a reading room where we've recreated Warhol's personal library. And this is in a very large part due to Phoebe Matana, one of my interns who I think is here tonight. Yay, Phoebe. We know
she was amazing.
About 300 to 400 titles that Warhol owned, either that are in the Warhol Museum's collection or that we've sort of culled from the Sotheby estate sale the year after Warhol died. So please feel free, stop by that room. We've arranged them in a very unique kind of way based on a sewn photo that Warhol did. I guess in the 70s that photo dates from, where he has in his home, in his Montauk, New York home, the books are arranged spine in, right? So you only see worn pages, you don't see any of the titles of the books. And you'll see Warhol's very eclectic tastes, everything from the first edition of the Atkins diet book from 1971 to he had lots of books on Princess Diana, not a huge surprise. So please do stop in there and browse around, and maybe at a later point we can talk a little bit about Warhol as a collector. But I think at this point I may just turn it over to all of you. I think we have a mic circulating to you in the back. So are there questions for Matt?
Blake.
Matt, I just wanted to give you this opportunity, which is a perfect one, to dispel a myth that's out there, which is that Warhol, it's not just a myth, it's in all the books, that Warhol was dyslexic and couldn't read, even illiterate.
Yeah, that's a big lie.
Do you want to elaborate a little bit on Warhol as a reader?
Well, I think, as Katie was saying, Warhol left behind a pretty large library. His books, it's not like they have marginalia in them. He wasn't a reader in that way, but I think he was just someone who absorbed information. I think, when you look at Warhol's work, I mean, he's pulling things into his work from a lot of different sources, and a lot of them are literary sources. I can give you an example, not so much of that, but just a story that was told to me by one of Warhol's friends who, I hope you have his book. Actually, you do have his book back there in the library. There's a man named Paul Bertram who was an academic. He was a scholar at Rutgers, and he wrote a book about some characters that appear in Shakespeare plays. And we have Warhol's copy of that book. And it's dedicated, there's a nice little dedication to Andy on the front of it. Paul visited the museum around 1995, 96, something like that, shortly after we opened. And he said, well, there's this story that going around that, Andy was dumb, and I just want to tell you, it's like, that's just not true. It's like in the 50s and the early 60s, we would go to the theater together. We would go to hear music and to dances together. And we would have dinner either before or afterwards. And we would talk about the performances that we were about to see or that we had seen. And Andy was as smart as anybody that I knew. So I think that there settles that.
Well, and Blake, you bring up a really good point. I mean, the sort of infamous quote, I mean, Warhol is often quoted, but the one that is sort of looms over us in this gallery, I never read, I just look at pictures, from the 1968 Stockholm book, of which we have a few copies in that cabinet. I think that this is what this exhibition really pushes against, that notion that Warhol is not reading, that he's divorced himself from it.
I think, Warhol was a great publicist. He learned publicity in the 1950s. Through his personal experiences. He was really like at the center of Madison Avenue, and he knew a lot of people who were masters of that. And so when he got into his pop phase, it was just kind of all about marketing. And he didn't have to say anything that was necessarily true. He just had to say the right thing, the thing that would be provocative, just to get attention.
Absolutely.
And to make people talk about him. That's all that mattered.
How about some other questions? Right here?
Yeah, there's something I always wondered about when I first discovered Warhol's commercial art, and how you would never predict from looking at that work that he would become who he was in the 60s and on. The drawings are so kind of whimsical and fey, and also, but also have this kind of suggestive side to them at the same time. And you hear about how incredibly successful he was as a commercial artist. He won all kinds of awards, and he was the most the commercial artist most in demand in New York. And it makes me wonder whether that style of his was somehow, because he so consistently picked up, as you were talking about, on things that already existed in popular culture for his for his work. Whether that style of his as a commercial artist was really sort of unique to him, or whether it was consistent with a kind of sensibility or a kind of stream of stuff that was going on.
But when you
and then one little sub-question. The shoe drawings, which he's so well known for, and which are also seem so stylized, right? I mean,
Yeah.
they're in the same kind of whimsical look of all book covers and all the other drawings of his you see. I can't help wondering if the shoes actually look like that. The original shoes, could you recognize a shoe by his drawing?
Yeah, the second half of your question, that's hard to answer. You know, a lot of those drawings, the ones that you're talking about, the really whimsical ones, they're based on images of shoes that he found here and there. But he would, you know, he would use this blotted line technique to first copy the image that he had found, but then in the blotting of it, it would be transformed. He would omit certain details, or he would add details.
Like trademark, they didn't actually represent some shoe that was on sale.
Not the shoes that are here, except in there's the book that's called Fashion 10. The drawings in that book are, you know, real shoes. That's for a real product, you know, for a real brand. But the shoes in A la Recherche de Shoes Perdus, those I think are more kind of whimsical, and they're I don't think that we've ever found any sources for those shoes. But then there's also the shoes that he drew for I. Miller, and the shoes that he drew as little spot drawings in the margins of the pages of Glamour and Harper's Bazaar. And those would be real shoes because they're real products, you know. So he would be sent, you know, an image of the shoe or the actual shoe itself, and then he would be expected to, you know, put the little toe in and get the heel right and all of that. Yeah.
How did he become so hugely successful with that very strange style, or was it not strange?
Well, there were other artists who were using a style that was really similar, and there was a graphic artist named David Stone Martin. There was another, Ben Shahn, who was really, really well known, and there were a few others too. And even if you look at say, if you could get a copy of a Graphis annual from that time period, or just like look at the work that was being presented at the AIGA awards every year. You know, there is this kind of a certain style. It's like kind of like, you know, even when you look back at design from the 80s, you know, it's like everything has that same kind of look.
So he was partly adapting toward it.
Yeah, he was, you know, of his time. Yeah, he was fitting in to, you know, to the mainstream, trying to anyway, but also to make his own niche as well.
In the 1990s, I owned a bookstore, secondhand bookstore in Great Barrington, and I made friends with Gerard Malenga. And he would come over and buy all kinds of books from me. Could you talk a little bit about his interview phase and Malenga and his collaboration to create that magazine?
Okay. I'm not really sure what the process was for creating Interview exactly. I mean, I think that you know, Warhol he said, and we've actually found evidence that this is true. He said that he started the magazine so that they could get tickets to the New York Film Festival for free. And we have Warhol's press pass from the New York Film Festival that year. So he, you know, that was the first time that he ever got a press pass to the New York Film Festival. So I think he wasn't making that up. But you know, Interview, when it was first started with Gerard and I think Paul Morrissey was another co-founder, and also John Wilcock was the fourth co-founder. And actually, John was the only one of the four who actually had any experience whatsoever with publishing, because he had worked for the Times and the Voice, and then he started his own little one called Other Scenes. But it was a really very eclectic kind of magazine. There was Gerard's poetry. Then they would, you know, pay the superstars $10 to review a film. Like, so you would get Taylor Mead's review of a Hollywood film, or Ondine's review of a porno film. But then they would also just throw in photographs of old Hollywood stars like Rita Hayworth, or even to go back even further, like the Gold Diggers of 33, something like that. Like whatever Hollywood pictures they could find, they would just throw them in there. So it was a very, very strange kind of publication, very quirky, and it wasn't until a few years later when Warhol and Bob Colacello and Glenn O'Brien, when they really started to be more involved in the publication, it started to be more of a kind of a pop culture magazine, and it really changed, and it really allowed Warhol to meet more people, like the younger people, the stars that he was always attracted to. Then suddenly they had a reason for wanting to meet him, because then they could appear in the pages of his magazine. Until by the time of like the 1980s, it was kind of like everywhere in newsstands. It was with these beautiful covers by Richard Bernstein, and it was just like a really gorgeous magazine. Totally different from what it was in 1969, 1970. So it took Warhol quite a while to reach that point, and also a long time for it to become profitable as well. And there was something, to get back to Truman Capote, too, with Interview magazine. As we were talking about how Warhol and Capote gradually became friendlier with each other, and even past 1966 with the black and white ball. In 1972 or 73, I forget which year, they did an interview with each other, a kind of a conversation that appeared in Rolling Stone magazine. We have that in the exhibition. And then in 1979, after Capote had kind of fallen out of favor with his socialite lady friends for writing some scandalous things about them, very thinly veiled, unflattering stories. Then Warhol decided to bring him in to Interview magazine, and he began to contribute articles every month. And then Warhol was able to do his portrait in exchange for all those articles that Capote was writing, and the portraits are right over there in that room.
Well,
there's a great photo of Capote with a bottle of gin in his hand, too.
Well, in a way, Warhol's career started with Capote, and I think we will end with Capote
It's a good place to end.
I want to thank Matt for this show and for this conversation.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks.